Welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. I'm Wendy O'Connell, and today we are here with Kira Storm. Kira is a writer, a radio personality, and a spell check champion. She also works at the Brattleboro Co-op, and Kira is a trans woman, and she lives with her family here in Brattleboro. So welcome, Kira.
Thank you, Wendy. Glad to be here.
We're so glad to have you on the show. And I think that many people will recognize Kira either from the stage of the Latches, from the Spell Check Championships, or in the Brattleboro Co-op, where she is at the front desk there, the cash register. And she is a brilliant punster, and I'm sure that anyone who has been in line waiting there has witnessed how quick and fast and amazing she is with puns. So if you could talk a little bit about words in your life, whether it was when you were a kid, when you started reading, what that meant to you.
Well, I started reading when I was 3. The book that I best remember learning to read with was actually a book made of puns. The words were all made out of letters. It was called CDB.
Oh, yes.
DB, EZB, ZB.
Yes.
And all the sentences in the book were made out of letters.
Yes.
And it was an odd little story made out of letters. And that's so I think I got off to a flying start with loving wordplay and, and the like.
And were you a big reader back then?
Constantly. As a child, and I've heard this from other trans women as well, that when I was young, I was kind of desperate to imbibe culture of all kinds. So I both read and watched television all the time. Too much television, I'm sure.
Well, we all did, yeah.
But also just, especially if I was out of the house, I was always reading, including walking down the street, which can be a little hazardous. But there it is.
Not as bad as a phone, probably.
Well, God, I of course couldn't even envision that at the time. This odd phenomenon we have now, where people walk down the street holding these objects, staring at them. But I did that. It was a book, and I get yelled at. People threw things at me.
Oh my gosh!
This happens. It's one of the things for you young people out there. If you walk down the street, it probably still happens. If you walk down the street reading a book, sooner or later someone will yell at you from a car, and undoubtedly, eventually someone will throw something at you. Humans are very strange.
Either do or don't try this at home or on the street. Just saying, right?
Yeah.
Right. So, Kira, you said that you've noticed that a lot of trans women have tended to go into the cultural investigation.
I mean, you're trying to find something. You're trying to find either to find a way to fit, either finding some frame that you can fit in because you don't fit in the frame that people are trying to put you in, or to try to figure out how to at least, how it is you're supposed to fit in the frame that everybody's putting you in. A lot of the books I read were about what a boy is supposed to be like, Tom Swift and Hardy Boys and all the Tarzan stories by Edgar Rice Burroughs and Sherlock Holmes and all these things that provided these models of what I theoretically was supposed to be like, and I tried to convince myself that I could be like that, but it didn't take so well.
Yeah.
But
So it was role models, really.
And
that
kind of thing.
It's interesting because I think looking back when I was reading, I don't remember looking for that, but at the same time, the fact that you were is indicating that you had a questioning back then. A great deal of my life, I would have to say that I haven't always been the most self-aware sort of person, and I think that actually started as a kid because it was dangerous to be self-aware. So there was part of myself that I put at a very young age, put in a box where I didn't look at it, and then I spent decades not looking at it, very hard, spending a great deal of energy not looking at it. And of course, this created a general kind of obliviousness at times. To what was really going on in my own head. Right, right.
And this is something that I've definitely heard from other trans women, a tendency to compartmentalize, to have all kinds of different lives going on simultaneously that didn't communicate with each other. One at school, one at home, various other ones that we'll save for another conversation.
So trying to fit into wherever you were.
Right. Chameleon-like.
Yeah. Do you remember asking someone if they remember the first time of anything is always risky, but that level of discomfort that you talk about, do you remember what that was like at an early age?
Yeah, I mean, of course I've thought about it some, and I think it really started in first grade. Kindergarten was good. I mean, I got kicked out of a preschool for singing and keeping the other children awake, but generally speaking, that whole small child time, I remember fairly positively, even though we were moving around constantly, and it was a little chaotic. But then I got to first grade, and suddenly there was all this hostility from every direction that I could not process and did not understand. You know, and you know, that didn't get better during the school years. I sometimes think that there's a certain term. It's the first half of the word pussycat. Yeah. And I estimate, quite literally, I was probably, that word was applied to me around 10,000 times.
Oh, wow.
If I were to estimate it. And that's not an exaggerated estimate, that's my attempt at a real estimate. Yeah. You know, every day, several times a day, if I went to school, or, you know, or often not at school, you know, I would get to hear that sooner or later, you know, from somebody. So, you know, I don't want to over dramatize it. Everybody has their challenges, and of course some people have much more impossible challenges. I mean, you know, growing up where, you know, bombs are going off and where there's no food and things like that. I mean, you know, things weren't always great economically, but I didn't starve, and I had clothes and transportation and things like that. But, you know, but yeah, if we're talking about gender, if we're talking about socialization, if we're talking about the things that books and television and movies will tell you is how childhood is supposed to be, lovely Victorian invention called the protected safe childhood, you know.
Going back to being in the school milieu and trying to fit in, like we were all trying to fit in one way or another. And so you must have felt a bit like an outsider. That was
odd. Yeah, it was always very odd. I remember being really startled because boys, what they will always do if they don't like you or if they're mad at you, or at least this was true then, I imagine it's not that different now, is they'll talk to you about the concept of being able to take you, by which they mean, you know, beat you up. Like I can win a fight against you. And this was, you know, from the get-go, this was an extremely puzzling concept to me. I had no idea why anybody would care about that. And certainly it was not something that I felt able to hang my hat on, so to speak, not that I wore hats. But, you know, it was very odd. And then the stories, the books I read told me that what you do when people are bullying you, what you're supposed to, you have to stand up for yourself. And I imagine they tell very different things to young people who are perceived as girls. They get told to cooperate and be nice or something. But what everything was telling me was that I was supposed to stand up for myself and punch the bully in the nose, and then he'll leave you alone. And I tried this very successfully once in third grade, and it startlingly successful. The bully cried, I got in trouble, a note got sent home. It was like, oh, hey, great. But then the next time I tried it in fourth grade, the kid laughed. So, you know, that was when I realized this was not a sustainable approach.
So you're growing up with no real language for this, right? No real role models. Was humor a part of how you were able to deflect? Yeah,
well, especially by the time I got close to adolescence, I had developed a very sarcastic manner and a love of, I mean, I always had the love of wordplay, but I was you know, constantly making jokes. I would try to make puns. I didn't understand about context then. So I would think of a pun, and I would just sort of present it. And my mother usually was getting to hear these, and she would just, you need a context. Why?
Because it's funny, it's the way it stands, right?
It's, you know, the idea itself is what I'm looking for here. There's the idea. What do you need more for? But you need more because then other people, you know, get the joke. So, in
the midst of all this, you had a sister.
I have a sister.
You had a sister,
yes.
And you had family support to a certain degree.
Well, it's a somewhat complicated question. Things were not stable, but I always had a lot of love from my mom and support in that sense. I've been thinking about it since we had a conversation about it. I was thinking about, you know, how people get put in boxes, and there's a traditional way, the sort of conservative, you know, you must follow the role that nature and or the heavens have devised for you. But what it took me a lot longer to understand is that there's a more sort of postmodern trap that trans folk and other folk fall into, where you get this kind of double bind. Either you're not fitting, you know, from the conservative side, you're not fitting the role that you're supposed to do, and then sometimes from the sort of liberal postmodern side, why does that matter? You know, trans people get this particular one a lot. You know, why? You know, there's a. Well, I was going to introduce a word that maybe a lot of your viewers don't know, and it kind of needs some introduction because it seems like a pretentious little word. it's actually more a prefix than a word. It's called cis, C-I-S,
Yes.
cis. And when I first came across this, it's a word that was created essentially by trans activists in the 90s. And when I first came across it, I thought, oh, what do you need that for? Well, what you need it for is that if you're going to actually have conversations about being trans or other things, it turns out that there's a default thinking element to most kinds of prejudice, where the people who are feeling the prejudice are not questioning their own assumptions that are just there in the background. And you can see this if you try to have a conversation with somebody about trans stuff. You quickly find that there's this disconnect that happens where if I say, well, if I want to talk about your experience as a woman, I have to find some way sometimes to distinguish it from mine, because even though I think of myself as a woman, you're a woman, our experiences are not the same. There are some things, I've never had a womb, as just an example, and that creates a difference. And if we're talking about it, and every time you want to try to bring the distinction itself into the conversation between a trans woman and a what? Right? You could say someone who's biologically female. That raises a huge can of worms about what we exactly mean by that and how archaic our understanding of biology is, and whether biology is destiny and all kinds of complicated things. In order to have a conversation, it turns out to be really, really handy to have this word cis. So I could say that you, for example, as far as I know, are a cis woman. It's not a pejorative, it's just descriptive, meaning essentially that your experience of your own gender matches up the expectations that come from the reproductive equipment and biology and so forth that you were born with. There's never been that disconnect there. There may have been disconnects about what the expectations around gender were, I would assume. Yeah. But that basic matchup was never in question. And so the term cis is really useful for that. Yeah. You talk about a cis lesbian. Like I identify as a lesbian person, but I'm not a cis lesbian. I'm a trans woman who's a lesbian, right? Just as an example.
And this brings us to the whole notion of culture, and the cultural differences, the changes in culture. When you were born, homosexual men were just coming out. I mean, it was just the very beginning of that.
Stonewall hadn't even happened when I was born.
Exactly. Yeah. So much has happened, and this is a huge change in a very short period of time. And I think that we're all trying to catch up with it. Whether pro or con or there or somewhere else.
Whatever part of the
we're all trying to catch up with it. And for me, after talking to you the other day, it made me start thinking a lot about how we, as whether we're supporters or where we are also transitioning. And we'll talk about you transitioning as well in a few minutes. But we're transitioning culturally, linguistically, in terms of understanding, and it challenges our identity. As well as the challenges, to your identity. And it raises all kinds of questions.
And all I want, as I often said, where there's goodwill, I don't have a problem. Like people, because of the job I have in retail, and because of my voice, which I've never really done anything to change. Some trans women will have operations to change their voice. I also sing sometimes in the Brattleboro Women's Chorus, which is a great group of people, Becky Graber and those folks, but it hasn't really changed my voice much. And so because of the job I do, and because I don't really wear makeup, I tried, I wasn't any good at it, I've never really learned to do it. So I get misgendered all the time at my job, several times, every shift, happens all the time. And so I will, and I just always say, well, I'm not a he or I'm not a sir, whatever the thing is, and say it very matter-of-factly and then continue. And because it's not a big deal to me as such, it matters to me to let the person know that isn't right, but it's not that I'm upset with them. It's just it's part of sort of advocating for myself and expressing myself to just let them know and then keep going. But what happens is people get upset, right? They get upset because they misgendered me. They themselves get upset, and so the apologies come, and sometimes they get overly elaborate, and it turns into this thing which I don't really want. So what I often tell them is, look, where there's goodwill, there's no problem. Right? I'm just letting you know, and that's how I feel about it. If we can have conversations about this, then with goodwill, then it doesn't matter what people's opinions are or what their confusions are. We will get to a place where we can do what we need to do. It's only where people feel like in order to be who they are, they have to invalidate other people's experience, that's when we run into trouble.
Right.
So
That's true right across the board, isn't it? I mean, everywhere. What you're talking about, people not, being aware that there's a difference, not wanting to offend, sort of feeling like they're walking on eggshells. And sometimes that can make you, I would think, feel even more isolated.
Right, I don't want people to walk on eggshells, and it really doesn't bother me if they, they're not paying attention to me. I'm just a cashier. I mean, we might be friendly, whatever, civil at least, I would hope, but they're just trying to shop. I don't expect them to be paying close attention to who I am. It doesn't bother me if they misgender me. As if they do it repeatedly, then I start thinking, well, okay, this person is having some kind of problem, unacknowledged or not. That would be a different thing if there was a pattern.
Right.
But if it happened once, and whatever. But I've had people leave me like notes, like leave me letters with these 3-page apologies, and I'm not gonna. It's not that I'm mad at those people, but I just kind of want them to understand. This does not have to be this big a deal. It's not that big a deal to me.
Right.
Being who I am is a big deal to me. But having other people act exactly the right way or say exactly the right thing,
But the thing too is that's showing that we're going through our own processes with this.
Right.
And so we're sort of looking to you in some ways, for signals or for. I mean, you're on a new path.
Sure.
You're sort of blazing a trail that hasn't happened before. Not to make too much of it, but it's true. It really is true. This has not existed before. I wanted to ask a little bit about transitioning and your process of transition. And I wondered, did you feel through that process that you were becoming more of yourself?
Oh, yes. I mean, yes. I mean, one of the things that was best about it, I've been married now to my current wonderful spouse it's about to be 14 years. And it was great. One of the best things about it, which is different from a lot of trans women's stories, alas, and trans men's, I'm sure, is that this was something that we were upfront about from the beginning. And I've been married once before. It didn't work out. Wasn't just about being trans. In fact, I'm not sure it was very much about being trans. There were other issues. But for a lot of trans women, of course, what happens is they get the courage or the strength or the understanding, whatever it takes, to say, okay, this is who I am. The person they're married to was not expecting to be married to a female person or a male person, and it creates a huge stress. It can go a lot of different ways from there. But it's one of the things I'm grateful for is that this was something we always knew. But I was still publicly very much in the closet at work and so forth, dressing in boy drag, as I call it, pants, all this stuff. And then we were talking about spell check. I got to win the spelling bee at the Latches the last 2 times they had it.
Yes.
And I say it was a team thing, but I was the speller. Sorry, Liz Levak, I love you, you're a good speller, but no, it was me. We all know this. Anyway, but the thing that I was most grateful, that was really, in a way, that was what started it, because I wore a dress, hair, everything, to do the spell check thing, and I was so glad when it was, of course, a relief to win the thing, because I had always thought of myself as an exceptional speller for a variety of reasons, and so it was very exciting to me to finally win it. But I was also just so relieved and grateful that I was wearing a dress. Yeah, it may sound silly to people. It's like, okay, and when that happened, that feeling of relief was what really clued me in. Like this, it is time. It is past time.
Yeah,
right. Because this is the feeling that I need about this.
That's right.
So that's when and then I was working at the retreat, and I went to the strolling of the heifers dress, because I had started transitioning, been to see an endocrinologist and doing all these things you have to do, but I hadn't done anything at work. And then one day I was at the strolling of the heifers, and this group of people from the place where I worked, the kids and the counselors, came through and saw me, and hi, and there I am in my dress, So at that point, I was like, okay, I called up the retreat and said, I'm a trans. Gendered person, whatever, and that was fine. They were fine about it. The retreat has other issues, which we won't get into, and that caused me to leave there. But it wasn't about me being trans. The kids were all completely fine, and most of the grown-ups were fine.
That's great, and I would think it would be a huge thing to declare yourself in that way, and in an outward expression.
Yeah, I mean, it mattered a lot, and then I got the job at the Co-op, and that's been particularly great because and again, this is probably not an unfamiliar story for a lot of trans folks, having that job where I actually was there from the beginning, like the marriage itself, like the job too, like accepted as who I am from the beginning.
Right.
It's nice.
Yeah.
You know, never had to think about it.
Yeah.
Never got any trouble from coworkers. Or, you know, it's a great environment for that.
Yeah. And the whole transitioning process, you actually had to go through certain requirements and certification. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, if you want to have a driver's license that says that you're female, for example, or passport, so you know all these things, there are different states have different rules about that. In Vermont, I had to have a letter from an endocrinologist. I had to have been in therapy for a year and have a letter from the therapist. And that's pretty much it in Vermont. There are much tougher hoops you have to jump through in other states.
I would bet
course,
there would be,
especially in the South. But that's what I did. So now my driver's license is.
Well, first there's the pronoun question, right, which is going to be ongoing, I guess, for a while. What do you think about that? What are your feelings about?
Well, again, as long as what somebody's doing doesn't require them to invalidate me, as long as this is kind of my key thing about this, people have the need to say, well, in order for me to believe what I believe, you have to be wrong, right? And my friend Imogen, hi Imogen, if you're out there, has a wonderful expression about this, because unfortunately there's a movement within certain elements of the LGBT community, particularly there's a faction within the lesbian community which is hostile to trans women. There's a term for it which I don't know, I should know what it means. It's called TERF. I don't know exactly what it means. But the gist of it is this idea that trans women, there are two sides to it, that they're invading space that doesn't belong to them, and that they're not real women. And what Imogen says about it that I've borrowed because it makes so much sense is that because it can be a persuasive sounding argument, it can sound intellectually coherent until you ask yourself, as Imogen does, are you arguing in good faith? She says it's a bad faith argument. And what she means by that is that in order to make that argument, you have to start by assuming that the experience that people are sharing with you is not honest, that people aren't giving you their honest report of their own experience, that trans women are lying, right? And of course that's absurd. But if you start from that point, if you say, well, trans women, these people are giving it as honest an account as they can of their own experience, you can't get to that place anymore, where you're saying that there's some sort of manipulation or fraud or whatever the heck it is going on here, because we're just telling you how it feels for us.
Right.
You can intellectually deconstruct gender. Most of us, I hope, have on some level. But the lived experience of most people is that the binary gender roles is are what you're presented with, what you grew up with. And what I sometimes say about that is, like, it's not that I believe in binary gender, it's that if what you're giving me, essentially, in the way I live my life, is a choice between male and female, I'm going to go with the female side every time, because that's what fits me. Now, people who decide that what fits them is to be they, or call themselves fluid or whatever, I have no problem. You know, I support that 100%. If it's working for you, if it makes sense to you, great. I'm never going to invalidate somebody else's experience in order to justify my own.
Yeah, yeah. I would like to have you talk a little bit about your writing and your radio show, because it's such a big part of the writing. I know the writing and words again.
Well, I love words. Writing has been a struggle for me against, and I think some of it is because I had gotten so used to burying certain things that for a long time the writing didn't really work out because I didn't have enough self-knowledge to write with. But I've tried to write all my life, and I've written some things. And I won one of the Write Action contests here that Rolf was doing, the Write Like the Dickens contest. That was a fun moment for those who know Write Action and all that. And part of my purpose in doing the radio show, which is on Tuesdays at 1 o'clock, it's called Zontar Radio on WVEW, the local community radio station, is to have a venue for writing. Now, I haven't done as much writing as I'd like with it, and probably a lot of writers say they're not doing as much writing as they'd like. But yeah, it's fun. I do love words. I love doing it. Mostly, a lot of times I just play silly things. The last show I played a lot of Firesign Theater, which was fun.
That's fun. Oh, you must have fun with that. The fire sign.
Fireside Theater is great.
Yeah, and so so what you're planning with the radio show then is to have like an ongoing story.
Yeah, there's a premise to it, which is kind of like if you know who Tokyo Rose is historically. The Zontar radio idea is that the DJ is a propaganda agent and recruiter for this absentee alien overlord, as I like to say, named Zontar. Its origin comes from a B movie of the 60s, which was a remake of a B movie from the 50s. And the B movie from the 60s is called Zontar, the Thing from Venus. If you like campy, bizarre things, I recommend checking it out. And I can't talk about all this without giving a shout out to my friend Jan, who is Zontar, who is the curator of the Zontar YouTube page and Zontar Facebook page. Zontar is kind of his thing, but his approach to it involves lots of surreal filmmaking, which they're very interesting, but I'm coming at it from a totally different angle.
Yes, and it's all audio, so yeah, it's very different. So you've started that radio show, and it's been going on for a while now?
The next show will be number 11. I've done 10.
That's so
10
cool,
shows.
so people should tune in. Great. You're living in a house with 4 various
we
age
have we have a grown
kids.
child who is my spouse's and mine. I mean, I've been parenting her since she was 9. She's now 24. Lives upstairs from us. Great kid. Is a librarian, which she always wanted to be. And then we have a young lady we adopted in foster care when she was 8. She's now 17. Hi, Mel. And we have a foster child living with us as well, who's 16, and then our youngest girl, who is ours biologically, whatever that means, genetically, which mostly means she has brain chemistry issues that I have to apologize for. Sorry, honey. But she is 8. 8. And that's the whole crew.
That's
the 2
that's a
moms.
little tribe you've got going on
plus
there.
the 3 cats and the dog and the fish.
Wow.
So,
that's a
there you
lot.
have it.
Lots of mom things that could go on all day long, pretty much, right?
If I was, if I was less lazy, I didn't say that.
And so, humor is amazing, though, isn't it?
Yes.
It really is incredible. It just is sort of a bomb over so many things.
A bomb, there's a bomb in Killing.
A bomb with an L.
Yes, I know.
Well,
I often say when people buy bombs, Badger bomb, I say, "Oh, you brought a bomb through my line." One of my go-to puns at work.
Yeah. It's fun, though, right? I mean, to have those kind of relationships with people who,
It's fun. I'm not actually, believe it or not, and people who see me at the co-op may be surprised to hear this, I'm not actually a very social person. I'm kind of introverted and shy in private. So when I'm there, I have, as I often say, it's great. There's a boundary, there's a counter, there's a set of expectations, and then I can be sort of performative and social and friendly and see all these people who I do love to see and have interactions with without, getting into my socially anxious, I can't talk to anybody state, which people who know me well are very familiar with.
I think too, though, in my experience, that those kind of relationships can be very deep too. You can have
some of them are,
quite amazing.
Some of my regulars at the co-op, I certainly consider friends at this point. People that I care a lot about.
Some amazing connections.
I see them all the time.
Connections that you never would have made before.
Sure.
Yeah. Do you want to say anything about being a tournament Scrabble champion as well?
Well, I used to play. I teach chess. I have chess classes. I've been a tournament chess player since I was a kid, and I've also played tournament Scrabble for many years.
Do you do crossword puzzles?
Yeah, I do crossword puzzles. I'm kind of snobby about it. I don't start doing them until Friday usually because the earlier ones in the week are too easy. But I do them. And do you Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Yeah.
Do you do them in pen?
Of course.
Of course you do.
Of course I do them in pen.
And what's your average time?
I'm not as fast as when I was younger. I probably 15 minutes. Depends on the puzzle.
Wow.
15, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Sometimes half an hour. Like the harder ones on Sunday might take me half an hour, 35 minutes.
Yeah, your brain is always working.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a quick brain. We're out of time. Thank you so much, Kira.
Thank you, Rhoda. Thank you, Wendy. It's been great.
It's been wonderful.
And thank you.
It was lovely.
Aiden and Roland.
Roland and Aiden, yes. Are the 2 people who we couldn't do this show without. Roland Boyden and Aiden Meyer. Thank you all out there, and we'll be back next week with Here We Are.